morning and welcome back. I am joined by Dr. Casey Harbine for another edition of Morning Rounds. Thanks for joining us again today.
Yeah, thank you.
Today, sniffing out fake medical news. All right, we hear a lot about fake news lately. What about fake medical news?
Well, I think the important thing to mention when we talk about fake medical news or fake news in general, sometimes there's a little bit of truth in it, and maybe it's just skewed in a way or presented in a way that is overly dramatizing the finding. Sometimes it's just plain wrong, and these are things that get repeated and propagated in our social media and our conversation, and it's important to know what's true and what's not.
How is it a problem?
Well, just like, we're all subject to it, right?
Right.
We all have our own opinions, our own subjective beliefs that we take into anything that we read and consume. But the problem is really when we start propagating it, we start sharing it with other people, and then it becomes this wildfire of sorts of wrong information. Think, for example, back in the 1980s with the AIDS epidemic. There were all sorts of bad information getting out there about how we contract AIDS. Or with Ebola a couple years ago, I remember people think if they touched a doorknob they would get Ebola. No. And more commonly we see it with things like immunizations and things like that, where people propagate non-science information.
And it's so easy to spread now on social media, so how can we spot fake medical news?
I think it's important just in general to always be suspicious, always be skeptical. If something sounds kind of like, wow, that's different, then it probably is not right. You should be sensitive to that, and you should investigate. Beware of statistics. If a study's presented and they say whatever diet reduced heart attacks by half, well, were there only 2 participants in the trial? One of them got a heart attack and one of them didn't. When they say something statistically significant, keep in mind that has nothing to do with whether or not it's clinically significant. Also remember that association is not causation. Just because something is associated with it, does not mean in any way, shape, or form that it causes the problem. And then ask yourself, is this journal, is this website, is this group that's presenting the information, are they reputable?
Right.
Is there what we call peer review or an editorial board or someone who double checks what they're representing? And then also ask yourself, who funded this information? If Coca-Cola is doing a study on whether or not childhood obesity is related to vending machines in schools, you should ask yourself if the results of that study are valid, because maybe they have different interests in there.
So what can you do then if you hear or read something that you find suspicious?
My first step is to stop and do a quick internet search. I had a friend recently who posted some information about a vaccine that I give my children with some alarming results. I was like, oh my gosh, is this really happening? It took me about 5 minutes to kind of realize that this was not good information out there. It was not scientifically sound. And it's really not very hard to go a couple extra steps and do some fact checking yourself.
So along with that, any other recommendations you have?
I think it's important for us all, in general, to fight confirmation bias. So that's like, if you believe that fluoridated drinking water is bad, you only read articles that support that. Likewise, if you're a big immunization proponent, it's important to read what other people are saying about it. And in general with news, it's important to get the other side so we can have better discussions and openly talk about the good and the bad. Be skeptical. Take the 5 minutes to do the research on yourself. And be careful what you spread on the internet. Be your own editor.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Morning Rounds. If you'd like to send us a question, you can do it by emailing us morningrounds@kpax.com.